Slavery, governance, and society. From the 1500s to the 1800s, the period from the 1500s to the 1800s was a transformative era for Nigeria, marked by the rise of the transatlantic slave trade, shifts in governance structures, and lasting impacts on society. The onset of the slave trade dramatically altered Nigeria's economic, political, and social landscapes, leading to both internal and external conflicts, as well as complex relationships between indigenous leaders, European traders, and affected communities. This summary dives into the main themes of this era, exploring how slavery, governance, and society evolved in Nigeria under these pressures, origins, and expansion of the slave trade. In the 1500s, the Portuguese initiated contact with the West African coast, leading to trade interactions that initially included goods such as ivory, spices, and gold. However, the demand for labor in the Americas soon led European traders to prioritize enslaved Africans. The establishment of sugar, tobacco, and later cotton plantations in the Caribbean and Americas dramatically increased the demand for enslaved laborers, with West Africa, including what is now Nigeria, becoming a central source for this human trade. Local rulers and merchants were often complicit, finding economic incentives in the trade through access to European goods, firearms, and new alliances. Local responses and resistance. The increased demand for slaves led to profound societal impacts. Some regions engaged actively in the trade, capturing individuals from rival communities and participating in slave raids. Others resisted. For instance, some Nigerian communities developed anti-slavery movements or formed alliances to protect themselves against raids. However, resistance was challenging due to the resources and influence wielded by pro-trade factions. Leaders like the Ero Confederacy in southeastern Nigeria became prominent intermediaries, organizing large networks for capturing and transporting enslaved people across the region. Role of governance in the slave trade. Local governance structures adapted and, in many cases, reoriented themselves around the slave trade. Traditional leaders who engaged in the trade gained power, access to European weapons, and wealth, which they used to fortify their positions. Rulers in prominent states, such as Benin and Oyo, adapted their political strategies to align with European powers, while other regions saw shifts in leadership as those who opposed the slave trade were overthrown. Governance during this period often revolved around balancing the demands of local economies with the increasingly dominant European influence, transformation of social and family structures. The slave trade's effects were not limited to governance and economics. It disrupted family units, depopulated regions, and changed social norms. The removal of a large portion of the population, particularly young men and women, had long-lasting effects on community structures and productivity. Families were often torn apart, leading to altered family dynamics and shifts in labor roles within households. Women frequently took on new responsibilities, maintaining both family and social structures, and some even gained prominence as market traders or local leaders in the absence of male family members. Cultural and religious adaptations. As different Nigerian regions engaged with European traders, the integration of foreign goods, ideas, and, eventually, religions began to reshape cultural identities. Christianity, introduced by European missionaries in the later part of this period, brought both conversion efforts and conflicts. At the same time, Islam continued to spread, particularly in the northern parts of Nigeria, which had its own established slave trade under Islamic jurisprudence. This complex religious landscape led to diverse spiritual responses to slavery and governance challenges, with some communities blending indigenous practices with new religious beliefs to resist or make sense of the societal upheaval. Economic dependency and the shift to palm oil. By the late 1700s and early 1800s, as the abolition movement gained momentum in Europe, demand for enslaved Africans began to wane. With the British Parliament abolition of the slave trade in 1807 and increasing pressure on other European nations, Nigerian societies started to transition to other forms of trade, particularly palm oil. The palm oil trade, which grew in demand due to the industrial needs of Europe, helped fill the economic void left by the declining slave trade. However, the dependency on a single commodity mirrored the economic risks previously associated with the slave trade, leaving Nigeria vulnerable to market fluctuations and external control. Long-term consequences and the colonial prelude, the legacy of the slave trade left deep scars in Nigerian society. Ethnic tensions and rivalries, heightened by the competitive nature of slave raiding, persisted, influencing political dynamics and community relations well into the colonial era. Many Nigerian societies, weakened by years of population loss and economic disruption, found themselves vulnerable to European colonial advances in the 19th century. The British, using their abolitionist stance as moral leverage, began to justify interventions and eventual colonization, claiming to bring stability and civilization to societies they deemed destabilized by the trade. The period between the 1500s and 1800s was transformative for Nigeria, characterized by the complex interplay of slavery, governance, and societal change. The transatlantic slave trade reshaped political alliances, introduced new economic dependencies, and left lasting cultural impacts. While it brought short-term economic gain for some, it ultimately destabilized communities, eroded traditional governance, and disrupted social structures, leaving legacies that would influence Nigeria's trajectory well into the colonial period and beyond.